Chosen one, your breakthrough was under attack, but it is safe, protected, still fully intact and still moving toward you exactly as it was always meant to, despite everything that tried to interrupt or derail it along the way. Do not close this video. Something inside you has felt the resistance lately, the extra friction, the sense that progress has felt harder to come by than it reasonably should, given the genuine effort you have been putting in. This message exists to confirm what you have already sensed, and more importantly, to reassure you that whatever resistance you have encountered has not actually succeeded in stopping what was already set into motion. Take a breath. Let your shoulders soften. Whatever tension you have been carrying about this specific area of your life, set it down for the next few minutes, because what follows is meant to bring genuine reassurance, not additional fear or anxiety layered on top of what you may already be carrying. Here is what has likely been happening recently, in whatever specific area of your life has felt most under pressure. Growth and breakthrough rarely unfold without encountering some form of resistance along the way, resistance that can come from many different sources simultaneously, some external, some internal, some simply woven into the natural difficulty of meaningful change itself rather than originating from any specific hostile source. Recall the specific texture of this recent difficulty as clearly as you genuinely can, without needing to relive every uncomfortable detail, simply enough to bring the pattern into clearer focus. Notice whether this difficulty arrived suddenly, as a specific event or turning point, or whether it accumulated gradually, a slow intensification that only became fully apparent once you paused to reflect on the overall pattern rather than simply experiencing each individual difficult moment in isolation. External resistance sometimes comes from other people, though not always in the dramatic, intentional way that phrases like "under attack" might initially suggest. Sometimes it looks like someone reacting with discomfort or subtle withdrawal as you begin changing in ways that shift the existing dynamic between you. Sometimes it looks like practical obstacles, delays, complications, unexpected setbacks that seem to arrive at precisely the moments when momentum was finally beginning to build. Sometimes it looks like doubt expressed by people around you, whether well-intentioned or not, questioning whether your specific path or timeline actually makes sense. Internal resistance often proves even more significant than external resistance, though it receives far less attention because it operates quietly, within your own mind and body, rather than announcing itself through obvious external events. This internal resistance can look like sudden waves of self-doubt arriving precisely when confidence would serve you best. It can look like exhaustion or illness appearing at inconvenient moments, your body somehow finding ways to slow down a process your conscious mind remains eager to accelerate. It can look like old fears resurfacing with unusual intensity, fears you thought had already been resolved or at least significantly diminished through previous work and reflection. Whatever combination of these forms of resistance has been present in your own recent experience, here is the reassurance this message wants you to genuinely absorb. None of this resistance has actually succeeded in stopping your breakthrough. It may have slowed its visible arrival, complicated the path somewhat, required more patience and resilience than you initially anticipated needing, but the underlying momentum, the fundamental trajectory toward positive change you have been working toward, remains intact and continues moving forward, even during periods when visible progress has felt frustratingly slow or entirely absent. Consider why resistance so often intensifies specifically during the periods right before significant breakthrough becomes visible, rather than remaining constant throughout an entire process of change. Meaningful transformation tends to require the old pattern, whatever specifically it happens to be, career situation, relationship dynamic, health habit, financial pattern, to eventually release its grip in order to make room for something new. This releasing process rarely happens smoothly or without friction. The old pattern, having existed for some time, tends to resist its own dissolution, generating exactly the kind of increased difficulty and resistance you may have been experiencing recently. Picture this old pattern almost as though it possesses its own kind of inertia, a tendency to persist simply because it has already been operating for some time, regardless of whether it continues genuinely serving you well. This inertia is not conscious or intentional in any literal sense, but it produces effects that can feel remarkably similar to active resistance, showing up as unexpected complications, renewed old fears, or circumstances that seem to conspire against the very change you have been working toward. This does not mean some external malicious force has been specifically targeting you personally. It simply reflects something true about how significant change tends to unfold generally, intensified difficulty often marking the final stretch before genuine breakthrough, rather than indicating that breakthrough has moved further away or become somehow less likely to occur. Reflect honestly on whether the resistance you have experienced recently has actually diminished your underlying commitment and clarity about what you are working toward, or whether it has simply made the path feel more difficult while your fundamental direction and determination have remained essentially unchanged. If your core commitment remains intact despite the resistance encountered, this itself represents significant evidence that your breakthrough remains genuinely safe, its foundation unshaken even while its visible arrival has perhaps been delayed or complicated somewhat by the difficulties you have faced. Here is something worth understanding about protection during this particular period, since the specific language this message opened with, "Your breakthrough is safe," deserves genuine explanation rather than simply being offered as comforting but ultimately empty reassurance. Protection here refers primarily to the underlying groundwork already completed, the genuine growth, learning, and preparation you have already accomplished, which cannot actually be undone by external resistance or internal difficulty, regardless of how challenging recent circumstances may have felt. Distinguish, in your own mind, between what actually remains vulnerable to disruption during this period, and what has already become permanently, unshakably yours regardless of ongoing external circumstances. Specific opportunities, specific timelines, specific external outcomes, these remain genuinely subject to influence and delay from difficult circumstances. But internal growth, skills developed, wisdom gained through genuine lived experience, these do not simply evaporate because external circumstances have temporarily become more challenging. This distinction matters significantly, helping clarify exactly what this message means when it insists your breakthrough remains genuinely safe despite whatever difficulty you may have recently encountered. Consider everything you have already learned, developed, and built during whatever period has led up to this current moment of resistance. Skills acquired. Clarity gained about what you actually want and need. Resilience developed through having already survived difficulties that once seemed insurmountable. None of this accumulated growth simply disappears because recent circumstances have felt particularly challenging or resistant to your continued efforts. It remains genuinely yours, a solid foundation that continues supporting your eventual breakthrough regardless of how much additional difficulty may still lie ahead before that breakthrough becomes fully visible and realized. Examine specifically what foundation you have already built in whatever area of your life feels most relevant to this current period of resistance. If career or purpose has been the primary area of focus, what specific skills, relationships, or clarity have you developed that remain genuinely yours regardless of current obstacles? If relationships have been the primary focus, what specific growth in your own capacity for honesty, vulnerability, or healthy boundary setting have you already achieved that continues benefiting you regardless of how any single relationship situation eventually resolves? If health has been the primary focus, what specific knowledge, habits, or resilience have you already developed that remain valuable regardless of how quickly full resolution eventually arrives? Naming this existing foundation specifically, rather than leaving it as a vague, unexamined assumption, can help you genuinely feel the truth of this message's central reassurance, that your breakthrough remains safe precisely because so much genuine work has already been accomplished, work that cannot simply be erased by whatever resistance or difficulty you have recently encountered along the way. Here is something further worth understanding about the specific nature of the resistance many people experience during periods of significant positive change, resistance that can sometimes feel almost deliberately targeted, as though something or someone is specifically working against your particular progress. This experience, while genuinely felt, usually reflects something more universal about how meaningful change tends to unfold, rather than indicating any actual malicious targeting specific to your individual situation. Picture, for a moment, how many other people around the world, at this very moment, are likely navigating remarkably similar experiences within their own particular circumstances, feeling the same kind of intensified resistance right before their own significant positive changes become fully visible. This is not meant to diminish the genuine, personal significance of your own particular experience. It is meant to offer perspective, situating your current difficulty within a broader, universal pattern rather than experiencing it purely as an isolated, uniquely targeted phenomenon happening exclusively to you alone. Notice how many people, across countless different life circumstances and cultures, describe remarkably similar experiences during periods of significant positive transformation, increased difficulty, unexpected obstacles, a sense of being tested precisely when they were finally beginning to move in a genuinely positive direction. This pattern appearing so consistently across such diverse experiences suggests something structural about the nature of significant change itself, rather than anything uniquely, specifically targeted at any single individual's particular circumstances. Recognizing this broader pattern can help transform how you relate to your own recent difficulty, shifting from a narrative of personal targeting or persecution toward a more universal understanding of how meaningful transformation tends to unfold for nearly everyone who pursues it genuinely and persistently. This shift matters significantly, because a narrative of personal targeting tends to generate additional fear and defensive contraction, while a narrative of universal difficulty during meaningful change tends to generate greater resilience and perspective, allowing you to continue moving forward with less unnecessary additional suffering layered on top of the genuine difficulty already present. Explore what specific narrative you have been holding about the resistance you have recently experienced. Has it felt more like universal difficulty, an expected part of any significant transformation process, or has it felt more like personal targeting, something or someone specifically working against your individual progress? If your narrative has drifted toward personal targeting, gently examine whether this framing genuinely reflects your actual circumstances, or whether it might be worth releasing in favor of the more universal, and ultimately more empowering, understanding already described throughout this message. Here is something important worth understanding about the specific role other people may have genuinely played during this period of resistance, since this message does not want to dismiss entirely the possibility that specific relationships have contributed to whatever difficulty you have recently experienced. Sometimes people close to us do struggle genuinely with our growth and change, not necessarily out of malicious intent, but out of their own fear, insecurity, or simple discomfort with dynamics shifting in ways that feel unfamiliar or threatening to whatever stability they had previously relied upon. Bring to mind, honestly, whether a specific person or relationship has felt connected to the difficulty you have recently experienced. This does not require immediately assigning blame or intention to that person. It simply invites honest acknowledgement of the pattern, allowing you to examine it more clearly rather than leaving it as a vague, unexamined sense of general difficulty without any specific relational context attached to it. If a specific relationship has felt particularly resistant or unsupportive during this period, this deserves honest examination rather than either harsh judgment of the other person or complete dismissal of your own genuine experience. Consider what specifically has felt unsupportive about this particular relationship, whether the behavior reflects a pattern that predates your current growth, or whether it seems specifically connected to discomfort with the particular changes you have recently been experiencing. Approach this examination with genuine curiosity rather than either defensive anger or excessive self-blame. Some relationships genuinely need boundaries during periods of significant personal growth, protecting your continued development from influences that, whether intentionally or not, tend to discourage or undermine that development. Other relationships simply need patience and honest communication, allowing the people involved time to adjust to changes that may feel unfamiliar or even threatening to them initially, without necessarily reflecting any genuine desire to prevent your continued growth and positive change. Distinguish, as honestly as you can, between these two categories as they apply to whatever specific relationships have felt relevant to your recent experience of resistance. This distinction matters significantly for determining what kind of response would actually serve you and the relationship in question most effectively, whether that response involves firmer boundaries, patient communication, or some combination of both depending on the specific relationship and circumstances involved. Here is something worth understanding about your own role in navigating this period of resistance successfully, since genuine protection of your breakthrough requires active participation on your part, rather than simply passive hoping that resistance will eventually resolve on its own without any deliberate effort or engagement required from you specifically. Picture the specific difference between someone who navigates a difficult period actively, continuing to make deliberate choices that support their eventual breakthrough even amid genuine hardship, and someone who navigates the same difficulty passively, simply enduring without any conscious strategy or continued engagement with their own growth and preparation. The external circumstances these two people face might be remarkably similar, yet their eventual outcomes often differ significantly, precisely because of this difference in active versus passive engagement with the difficulty itself. Examine what specific practices or habits have helped sustain you through periods of difficulty in the past, resources you may have temporarily set aside during this particular period of increased resistance and pressure. Perhaps regular exercise or movement that helps process stress and maintain physical resilience. Perhaps specific relationships that offer genuine support and encouragement, distinct from whatever relationships may have felt more resistant or unsupportive recently. Perhaps specific spiritual or reflective practices that help maintain perspective and connection to your deeper sense of purpose and direction. If any of these supportive resources have been neglected during this particular period of increased difficulty, consider deliberately returning to them now, recognizing that sustained resilience through periods of resistance typically requires active maintenance of whatever practices and relationships genuinely support your continued well-being, rather than assuming these resources will simply remain automatically available without any conscious attention or effort on your part. Consider, too, what specific new practices might genuinely help you navigate the remaining period of resistance more effectively, even if these particular practices have not been part of your routine previously. Sometimes periods of significant difficulty call for new resources, not simply a return to previous habits, since the specific challenges of this particular period may require somewhat different support than what has served you well during other, different periods of your life and personal development. Here is a further consideration worth holding as you continue moving through this period of resistance toward your eventual breakthrough. Patience during this particular time differs significantly from passive resignation, a distinction worth understanding clearly given how easily these two states can become confused, particularly during extended periods of difficulty that test a person's continued resolve and commitment. Notice the specific internal quality that distinguishes these two states when you examine your own experience honestly. Genuine patience typically retains some quality of active hope and continued engagement, even amid difficulty. Passive resignation typically feels flatter, more disconnected, a kind of quiet giving up that may not even be consciously recognized as such, simply experienced as ordinary daily functioning without any particular awareness that genuine engagement with your own growth and preparation has quietly stopped occurring. Genuine patience continues taking meaningful action, however small, while releasing excessive anxiety about controlling the exact timing of when full resolution will eventually arrive. Passive resignation essentially disengages entirely, having quietly concluded that further effort serves no genuine purpose, going through daily motions without any real continued engagement or hope for eventual positive resolution. Assess honestly which of these two states more accurately describes your own current approach to this period of resistance and anticipated breakthrough. If your current experience feels closer to passive resignation, disengaged and simply enduring rather than actively participating in your own continued growth and preparation, this message is encouraging a gentle shift back toward more genuine, engaged patience, continuing whatever meaningful action remains available to you while releasing excessive need to control precisely when and how full resolution eventually unfolds. Here is something worth understanding about the specific timeline you might reasonably expect for this current period of resistance to fully resolve, recognizing that no message, however genuine and well-intentioned, can offer precise certainty about exact timing for something as individually variable as your own specific breakthrough and its full resolution. Resist the temptation to demand an exact timeline before allowing yourself to feel any genuine reassurance from this message's core content. Uncertainty about exact timing does not negate the genuine truth of what this message has been describing throughout, that your underlying breakthrough remains intact and continues moving forward despite whatever resistance you have recently encountered. Holding both this uncertainty about precise timing and this genuine confidence about eventual positive outcomes simultaneously, rather than needing one to fully resolve before accepting the other, represents exactly the kind of mature, engaged patience this message has been encouraging throughout its content. What can be said with reasonable confidence is that periods of intensified resistance, when they genuinely mark the final stretch before significant breakthrough rather than indicating a fundamentally stalled or failed process, typically do not extend indefinitely without any eventual resolution or relief. This does not mean resolution will necessarily arrive within days or even weeks. It simply means that the specific quality of intensified difficulty you have described, rather than being a permanent new baseline, more typically represents a temporary, if genuinely challenging, phase within a larger process that continues moving toward eventual positive resolution. Notice whether, despite the genuine difficulty of recent experience, any small signs of movement or positive development have still been present, even if these signs have felt overshadowed by the more prominent resistance and difficulty you have also been experiencing simultaneously. Small signs matter significantly here, evidence that the underlying process remains genuinely active and moving forward, even during periods when the more difficult, resistant aspects of the experience have understandably claimed most of your conscious attention. Here is something worth understanding about how you will recognize your breakthrough once it fully arrives, especially given that it may present itself somewhat differently than whatever specific picture you may currently hold regarding what this breakthrough should ultimately look like. Genuine positive resolution often arrives in a form that differs, sometimes significantly, from initial expectations, frequently proving, upon reflection, to be better suited to your actual underlying needs than the specific picture originally imagined, even though this recognition typically only becomes fully clear in retrospect, once the actual resolution has had sufficient time to unfold and prove itself through lived experience. Remain genuinely open to this possibility, rather than becoming so attached to one particular vision of resolution that you risk failing to recognize genuine positive change simply because it does not precisely match your original expectations. This flexibility does not require abandoning genuine desires or settling for something less than what you actually want and deserve. It simply means holding your specific expectations somewhat loosely, allowing space for genuine breakthrough to arrive in whatever form actually proves most beneficial, even if that form differs from your initial anticipation. Consider the specific role that rest and genuine recovery might play during this particular period, since sustained resistance over an extended time often depletes physical and emotional reserves in ways that can be easy to underestimate while remaining fully immersed in the ongoing difficulty itself. Notice whether you have been operating from a place of genuine, replenished energy recently, or whether exhaustion and depletion have become quietly normalized, treated as simply how things currently are rather than as a genuine signal that additional rest and recovery might significantly support your continued capacity to navigate whatever difficulty remains ahead. If depletion has become normalized in this way, prioritizing genuine rest, even briefly, even amid continued pressure and difficulty, often proves more valuable than continued relentless effort without any accompanying recovery. Rest here does not mean abandoning your continued engagement with whatever process remains ongoing. It means recognizing that sustainable engagement over an extended period typically requires periodic genuine recovery, rather than assuming continuous, uninterrupted effort represents the only legitimate path toward eventual breakthrough and resolution. Examine, too, the specific role that community and shared experience might play as you continue navigating this period of resistance. Isolation tends to intensify difficulty, making resistance feel more overwhelming and more specifically targeted than it might feel when shared honestly with others who can offer perspective, support, or simply genuine companionship during a difficult stretch. If you have been navigating this particular period largely alone, consider whether opening up to at least one trusted person about what you have genuinely been experiencing might provide meaningful relief and support, distinct from whatever specific relationships may have felt more resistant or unsupportive during this same period. Think about what specific language you have been using internally to describe this period of resistance, since this internal language shapes experience significantly more than most people initially recognize. Language that frames the difficulty as evidence of failure or as proof that breakthrough is unlikely tends to reinforce discouragement and reduce genuine resilience. Language that frames the difficulty as a genuinely challenging but ultimately temporary phase within a larger process of positive change tends to support continued engagement and resilience more effectively, even while fully acknowledging the real difficulty currently being experienced. Notice which of these framings has been more prominent in your own internal language recently, and consider, gently, whether shifting toward the second framing, without denying genuine difficulty, might actually better reflect your genuine situation as this message has attempted to describe it throughout. Explore, as well, what specific spiritual or philosophical framework, if any, genuinely resonates with your own worldview regarding difficulty and eventual positive resolution, since different frameworks offer different but potentially equally valid ways of understanding and navigating periods like the one you have recently experienced. Some people find genuine comfort and strength in explicitly spiritual or religious frameworks, understanding difficulty as part of a larger meaningful pattern guided by forces beyond purely human explanation. Others find similar comfort and strength in more secular frameworks, understanding difficulty as a natural, if genuinely challenging, part of any significant process of growth and change, without necessarily requiring explicitly spiritual explanation. Whichever framework genuinely resonates with your own perspective and worldview, allow it to support your continued navigation of this period, rather than feeling obligated to adopt a specific framework simply because this particular message has used certain spiritual language and framing throughout its content. Here is a final significant consideration before this message moves toward its close. The specific difficulty you have recently experienced, whatever precise form it has taken in your own particular circumstances, has not been meaningless or without genuine purpose, even though this purpose may not yet be fully clear or visible from where you currently stand within the ongoing process. Difficult periods, particularly those that arrive specifically during significant transitions toward positive change, often serve important functions that only become clear later, in retrospect. They test and thereby strengthen genuine commitment, distinguishing between goals held only superficially and goals genuinely important enough to persist through real difficulty in pursuit of their eventual realization. They build resilience and capability that will likely prove valuable not only for achieving this specific breakthrough, but for navigating whatever future challenges eventually arise beyond this particular situation as well. They often clarify, through the very process of struggle and difficulty, exactly what you genuinely want and value, sharpening that clarity in ways that ease and comfort alone rarely manage to achieve as effectively. Reflect on what specific growth or clarity you can already identify, even amid ongoing difficulty, from whatever resistance you have recently experienced. This reflection does not require minimizing genuine pain or difficulty by immediately reframing everything into artificial positivity before you have even finished fully processing what has genuinely been hard about this particular period. It simply invites honest acknowledgement that difficulty and genuine growth frequently coexist, rather than existing as mutually exclusive categories that cannot both be true simultaneously within the same lived experience. Before this message reaches its true close, take one final moment for yourself, genuinely absorbing what has been shared throughout this reflection rather than rushing immediately toward whatever comes next in your day. Identify, specifically, the area of your life where this sense of resistance or attack has felt most present recently. Identify, specifically, one piece of evidence, however small, that your underlying breakthrough in this area remains genuinely intact despite the difficulty you have experienced. Identify, specifically, one supportive practice or relationship you might deliberately strengthen during the remaining period before full resolution eventually arrives. This reflection does not need to feel dramatic or overwhelming in order to matter significantly. It simply needs to feel genuine, honest engagement with your actual current circumstances rather than either dismissive minimization of real difficulty or excessive catastrophizing that assumes the worst about what recent resistance actually means for your ultimate trajectory and eventual outcome. Trust that whatever resistance you have recently faced has not actually succeeded in stopping what was already genuinely set into motion within your life. The foundation you have built remains yours, unshaken by external difficulty or internal doubt, continuing to support your eventual breakthrough even during periods when that breakthrough has felt distant, uncertain, or actively under threat from various sources of resistance and difficulty. There is one more layer worth adding before this message truly comes to its close, something practical that ties together everything shared today into a single thread you can genuinely carry forward through the remaining period of this journey. Consider what specific signs, however small, might indicate that this period of resistance is beginning to genuinely shift, rather than continuing indefinitely without any visible change. These signs often arrive gradually rather than as a single dramatic moment of complete resolution. Small improvements in energy or clarity, brief periods of relief within an otherwise difficult stretch, unexpected moments of ease or positive connection that stand out precisely because they contrast with the more prevalent difficulty surrounding them. Paying attention to these smaller signs, rather than only watching for one large, definitive marker of complete resolution, can help you notice genuine positive movement even before the fuller breakthrough has become entirely visible and undeniable. Reflect on whether any such smaller signs have already been present in your recent experience, even if they have felt overshadowed by the more prominent difficulty you have also been navigating simultaneously. Naming these smaller signs specifically, rather than allowing them to remain unnoticed background details, can help reinforce genuine hope and continued engagement, evidence that the process described throughout this message is indeed unfolding, even during a period that has understandably felt more defined by its difficulty than by its progress. Examine, too, what specific support you might proactively arrange for yourself during whatever remaining period of difficulty continues ahead, rather than waiting until difficulty intensifies further before seeking out whatever support might genuinely help. This might mean scheduling regular time with a specific supportive person, establishing a consistent practice that helps maintain perspective and resilience, or simply committing to checking in honestly with yourself on a regular basis about how you are genuinely doing throughout this continued process. Consider what you would want to remember, 1 year from today, looking back honestly on this particular period of difficulty and resistance. Perhaps you would want to remember that you continued showing up, even when showing up felt genuinely difficult. Perhaps you would want to remember specific moments of resilience or clarity that emerged precisely because of, rather than despite, the difficulty you were navigating. Perhaps you would simply want to remember that you trusted the process, even during moments when trust felt genuinely hard to access and maintain. Holding this future perspective in mind, even briefly, can help inform how you choose to move through the remaining period of this particular journey, approaching current difficulty not merely as something to be endured and survived, but as a genuine part of a larger story you are actively living and shaping through your own continued choices and responses, regardless of how challenging those choices sometimes feel in the present moment. This message reached you today for a reason. Trust that. Carry it with you. And when you are ready, not before, not because anyone told you to, but when you are genuinely ready, take your next step. Deep down, you already know what that step is. Thank you for receiving this message today. Be gentle with yourself as you continue moving through whatever resistance remains, trusting that your breakthrough, though it may have been tested, remains genuinely safe and continues moving steadily toward you.